The stars near the edge of human space were quiet. They had been quiet for almost 80 years. No wars had touched this part of the galaxy since the last great conflict ended, and most species who lived near this border had learned to leave the region alone. They called it the Silent Line. Nobody crossed it without a reason. Nobody stayed there long, except for one ship. That ship was called the Watchtower. It was old, gray, and did not look like much. From a distance, it looked like a tired cargo hauler that had been left behind by its owners. It had no fleet around it, no support ships, no visible weapons on its hull. It sat alone at the edge of a quiet star system, turning slowly, watching the dark. Inside the Watchtower, Captain Mara Ilian sat in a chair that had grown soft and worn from years of use. She was in her 40s, though her eyes looked older. She had short brown hair, tired but sharp features, and hands that moved without hesitation over the control panel in front of her. She had been the captain of this ship for 9 years. In that time, nothing had happened. No enemy had ever come close. No alarm had ever sounded. She had grown used to the silence, the same way a person grows used to living next to a quiet river. She did not expect the river to ever flood. Beside her, on the main screen, a calm blue light pulsed gently. This was Corvus, the ship's artificial mind. Corvus was not like the simple computers found on smaller ships. It was old and wise in its own strange way. Built decades ago, using technology humanity did not talk about openly. It rarely spoke unless it had something important to say. "Captain," Corvus said one morning, its voice steady and calm. "I am detecting movement at the edge of long-range sensors. It is large. It is organized. It is not natural." Mara sat up straighter. "How large?" "At least 400 ships," Corvus said. "Possibly more. The formation suggests a military fleet, not a trade convoy." Mara felt her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. 9 years of waiting had trained her not to panic. "Do we know who they are?" "Not yet," Corvus said. "But the ship design does not match any recorded human, allied, or previously known hostile force. This is a new contact." Mara looked out the window at the dark stars. For years, she had trained for this exact moment, running simulations, studying old data, learning everything the Sentinel program had taught her. But knowing something might happen, and having it actually happen, were two very different feelings. She took a slow breath. "Send the standard signal," she said. "Let's see who they are." Far away, on the other side of that dark space, the alien fleet moved forward, like a great slow wave. This was the Corveth Dominion, a large empire that had spent the last 300 years expanding across the stars. They had conquered many worlds. Some worlds had surrendered peacefully once they saw the size of the Corveth fleets. Others had fought and lost. The Corveth were proud of their history. They believed strength decided everything, and they had never met a force strong enough to stop them. At the front of the fleet, aboard the flagship Ur-Kesh's Glory, High Marshal Tarn Ur-Kesh stood on the bridge, watching the stars ahead. He was a tall alien, with gray-blue skin and deep-set eyes that missed nothing. He had led fleets for over 30 years, and he had never lost a major battle. His officers respected him. Some feared him. He liked it that way. "Report," he said, his voice low and firm. A younger officer, Vex Solon, stepped forward. Vex was newer to the fleet, still eager to prove himself, still uncertain in the way that young officers often were. "Marshal, our scouts confirm we are approaching the edge of human territory. Records say this species is small in number and technologically behind us. Some old reports mention strange energy readings near their border, but nothing confirmed." Tarn nodded slowly. "The humans," he said, as if tasting the word. "I have heard of them. A quiet species. They do not expand. They do not attack. Some say they are hiding something. Others say they are simply weak and afraid."
"Which do you believe, Marshal?"
Vex asked.
Tarn's eyes narrowed slightly.
"I believe nothing until I see it myself. That is how I have survived this long." He looked toward the main screen, where the edge of human space appeared as a soft blue line on the star map. "Continue forward. If they wish to speak, we will listen. If they wish to fight, we will show them why fear is useful." The fleet moved on, hundreds of ships gliding through the dark in near silence. It did not take long before Corvus detected the human border sensors picking up the fleet's approach in greater detail. The data came in fast: ship types, estimated weapons, engine signatures. Corvus processed all of it in seconds. "Captain," Corvus said, "I now have a clearer picture. 412 ships confirmed. Many are warships of considerable size. Weapon signatures suggest energy-based armaments, common among expansionist species. This fleet is not here to trade." Mara's jaw tightened. "So it's an invasion fleet." "That is the most likely explanation," Corvus said. Mara stood up and walked closer to the window. Outside, the stars looked exactly the same as they had for 9 years. Calm, cold, endless. But now, somewhere in that darkness, hundreds of alien warships were moving toward the one thing she had sworn to protect, not with weapons of her own choosing, but with patience, and with a warning system built long before she was born. "Corvus," she said quietly, "prepare the standard first contact broadcast. All known translation protocols, let's find out what they want." "Broadcast ready," Corvus said a moment later. Mara nodded. "Send it." The message went out across space, carried on a wide beam that any modern ship could receive and translate. It was simple. It was calm. It did not threaten. It did not beg. It simply stated a fact, the same fact that had been sent to every unknown fleet that had ever approached this part of space in the last 80 years. "This is Earth Sentinel Vessel Watchtower. You are approaching human territory. Turn back now. This is your only warning." Aboard the Urkesh's Glory, the message arrived, and was translated within seconds. Vex read it aloud to the bridge crew, and for a moment, there was a strange kind of silence, the kind that comes right before people start laughing. "One ship," Vex said, almost amused. "One single ship is telling us to turn back?" Several officers chuckled. Even Tarn allowed himself a small, thin smile. "Confirm the source," he said. "Confirmed, Marshal," came the reply from the sensor officer. "One vessel, old design. No visible weapon systems larger than standard defense turrets. No support fleet. No shipyard nearby. It appears to be alone." Tarn studied the image of the watchtower on the main screen. It looked exactly as it had been described. Old, plain, unremarkable. He had seen 1,000 ships like it in his long career, usually right before they were destroyed or captured. He felt no fear looking at it, only mild curiosity. "A single sentinel," he said slowly, "left here to guard an entire border, with no support." He shook his head. "Either these humans are foolish, or they believe something we do not know." "Should we destroy it, Marshal?" Vex asked. Tarn considered this for a long moment. Destroying it would be easy, almost too easy. But something about the confidence in that message bothered him, just slightly. A truly weak species would beg. A truly desperate captain would ask for terms. This message had done neither. It had simply stated a fact, calmly, like someone warning a child to step away from a fire. "Send a response," Tarn said finally. "Tell them we are the Corveth Dominion. Tell them we come in peace, for now, but we will not turn back for a single ship's warning. Ask them to stand down and allow us to pass, or face the consequences of resisting an empire far greater than anything they have ever known." The message was sent. Back aboard the watchtower, Corvus translated it instantly and read it to Mara in its calm voice. "They call themselves the Corveth Dominion," Corvus said. "They claim to come in peace, but they refuse to turn back. They ask us to stand down." Mara let out a slow breath. She had studied dozens of old first contact reports during her training. Almost all of them followed a similar pattern: confidence from the newcomers, disbelief that a single ship could mean what it said, and then, eventually, either retreat or conflict. She had hoped for retreat. She had trained for conflict. "What's your assessment, Corvus?" she asked. "Based on their fleet size, ship design, and communication tone, I estimate an 87% probability that they intend to continue forward regardless of our warning," Corvus said. "Their fleet formation also suggests confidence bordering on arrogance. This is common among species who have not yet encountered a force capable of matching them." Mara nodded slowly. She had known this might happen the day she accepted this post. The Sentinel program was not designed to start wars. It was designed to prevent them, by giving any approaching fleet every possible chance to walk away peacefully before anything else happened. But not every fleet listened. Not every species believed a warning until it was too late to matter. "Send the final message," she said. "Tell them exactly what will happen if they continue. No threats, just the truth." Corvus prepared the message and sent it exactly as instructed. It was short, but it carried more weight than the alien fleet could yet understand. "This is your final warning. If you cross the marked boundary, this vessel will act to stop you. What happens after that will not be started by us, but it will not be stopped by us either. Turn back now, while it is still your choice to make." Aboard the Urkesh's Glory, Tarn read the message twice. Something about the wording stayed with him. Not the threat of the vessel acting, which he dismissed easily enough, but the second part. What happens after that will not be started by us, but it will not be stopped by us either. It sounded less like a warning between two fleets, and more like the words of someone describing a natural disaster, something bigger than any single ship or captain. He looked at Vex. "What do you make of that?" Vex frowned. "It sounds like a threat, Marshal, or perhaps a bluff." "Perhaps," Tarn said, but he did not feel entirely convinced. Still, 30 years of victories had taught him that hesitation, in front of a weaker enemy, was its own kind of danger. If word spread across the Dominion that the great Marshal Tarn Urkesh had turned an entire invasion fleet around because of a single old ship's warning, his reputation, and his career, would suffer greatly. Pride was a heavy weight, and he had carried it for a long time. "Continue forward," he said at last. "Full fleet advance. If the humans wish to test us, we will show them the cost of that decision." The order spread through the fleet, and hundreds of engines lit up brighter as the ships moved forward, crossing slowly toward the marked boundary of human space. Aboard the watchtower, Corvus reported the movement calmly. "Captain, the fleet is continuing its advance. They will cross the boundary in approximately 11 minutes. Mara sat back down in her chair. She looked at the star map, watching the small red dots representing the alien fleet creep steadily closer to the thin blue line that marked the edge of everything she had sworn to protect. 9 years of waiting, and now this. She thought of her training, of the long nights studying old battle reports from wars fought before she was born, of the quiet promise she had made when she first stepped onto this ship. Give them every chance. But if they don't take it, don't hesitate. "Corvus," she said quietly. "Begin standard defense protocol. Quietly. No visible changes to the ship's exterior. Let them come as close as they want." "Understood, Captain," Corvus replied. Deep within the watchtower, systems that had not been used in years began to wake up, slowly and silently, hidden behind the ship's old and worn exterior. Nothing on the outside changed. To any sensor watching from a distance, the watchtower still looked exactly like a tired old ship, alone at the edge of the dark. But it was not as alone, or as weak, as it appeared. 11 minutes passed in near silence. Mara watched the boundary line on the star map, her hands steady on the console, her breathing slow and even. She thought about her family back on Earth, about the quiet towns and busy cities that had no idea a fleet of 400 alien warships was approaching their border at this very moment. She thought about the long history of the Sentinel program, about the war that had created it, about the lessons humanity had learned the hard way, decades ago, and had never forgotten since. "Captain," Corvus said softly, "the lead ships of the Corvith fleet have crossed the boundary." Mara closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, calm and focused. "All right," she said quietly, more to herself than to Corvus. "Let's see what they came here to learn." Outside, in the dark and silent space between the stars, the alien fleet continued forward, confident and unaware of what truly waited for them. And the watchtower, old and quiet and seemingly alone, began, at last, to wake up completely. The Corvith fleet crossed the boundary line without any resistance, and for a short while, nothing happened. The stars stayed quiet, the old human ship stayed where it was, drifting slowly, showing no sign of alarm. On the bridge of the Urkesh's Glory, some of the younger officers began to relax. A few even smiled. "It seems the humans were bluffing after all," Vex said, watching the sensor readings. "The vessel has not moved, no weapons have activated, no signal has been sent." High Marshal Tarn Urkesh did not smile. He kept his eyes on the main screen, studying the small gray shape of the watchtower as it slowly grew larger in the fleet's sensors. Something about its stillness bothered him. In his experience, weak ships either ran or begged. Strong ships prepared. This ship had done neither. It simply waited, like a spider sitting still in the center of its web. "Do not celebrate yet," Tarn said quietly. "A quiet enemy is not the same as a defeated one." He ordered a small strike group to approach the watchtower directly. 6 fast attack ships, enough to destroy a single old vessel many times over, but not so many that it would waste the fleet's main strength. It was meant to be a simple lesson, a quick and clean demonstration to prove that the humans' warning meant nothing. The 6 ships broke away from the main fleet and moved forward, engines glowing bright against the dark. They were sleek and fast, built for speed and short, brutal strikes. Their pilots were experienced, chosen from among the best in the fleet. They expected an easy kill. Aboard the watchtower, Corvus tracked their movement carefully. "Captain, 6 enemy vessels have separated from the main fleet. Trajectory suggests a direct attack run on our position. Estimated arrival, 4 minutes." Mara's hands rested lightly on the console. She did not feel afraid. She felt something closer to sadness, the same feeling she imagined a doctor might feel, right before delivering bad news they had hoped never to give. She had studied every old report about first encounters like this one. She knew how it usually ended for the other side. "Let them get close," she said. "No need to waste anything on a warning shot. They already had their warning." "Understood," Corvus said. The 6 alien ships closed the distance quickly, weapons charging, sensors locked onto the old human vessel. To their scans, the watchtower still looked exactly as it had before. Unarmed, unprotected, alone. The lead pilot, a confident young Corvus named Dressa Kell, opened a private channel to her squadron. "Target is defenseless," she said, almost laughing. "This will not even count as a real fight." She gave the order to fire. 6 ships released a wave of concentrated energy weapons, streaking through the dark toward the old gray hull of the watchtower. For a brief moment, it looked as though nothing could stop them. Then, just before impact, something changed. A shimmer passed across the watchtower's hull, faint, almost invisible, like heat rising off a hot road. The incoming weapons fire struck an invisible barrier and scattered harmlessly into empty space, the energy dispersing without leaving so much as a scorch mark on the ship's old gray plating. On the bridge of the lead alien ship, Dressa's confident smile disappeared. "Impossible," she muttered, staring at her sensors. "That should not be possible for a ship this size." Before she could give another order, the watchtower responded. Panels along its hull, panels that had looked like nothing more than old maintenance hatches, slid open smoothly. From within, thin beams of blue-white light shot out, moving with a speed and precision that no Corvus pilot had ever seen before. The beams struck each of the 6 attack ships in turn, not with wild, spreading energy, but with pinpoint accuracy aimed at their engines and weapon systems. It happened in less than 8 seconds. 2 of the alien ships lost power completely, drifting helplessly in the dark. 3 others suffered critical damage to their weapons and had to break off, engines struggling to keep them stable. The 6th ship, Dressa's own vessel, took a direct hit to its main reactor. Alarms blared across her bridge as the ship shook violently. "Fall back," Dressa shouted, gripping her controls tightly, as sparks flew from a damaged console beside her. "Fall back now." The surviving ships turned and fled back toward the main fleet, moving as fast as their damaged engines could carry them. What had been meant as an easy demonstration had instead become a disaster. Not a single alien ship had managed to land a hit. Not a single human weapon had been fired in anger. Exactly. Only in calm, precise defense. Back aboard the Urkesh's Glory, the bridge fell into stunned silence as the reports came in. Vex stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. "Marshal. 2 ships disabled, 3 damaged, 1 nearly destroyed, all within seconds, by a single vessel." Tarn's face remained still, but his eyes had grown sharp and focused. He studied the replay of the battle again, watching the way the beams had moved, not wild, not desperate, but controlled and exact, like a skilled hunter, choosing exactly where to strike. This was not the work of a weak or outdated ship. This was the work of something built with purpose, and used by someone who knew precisely what they were doing. That was not a full display of its strength, Tarn said quietly. That was restraint. Vex looked at him, confused. Restraint, Marshal? It destroyed most of our strike group. No, Tarn said, shaking his head slowly. Look again. It disabled 2 ships. It damaged 3. It could have destroyed all 6 easily, if it wished. Instead, it chose to cripple, not kill. That is not the action of a desperate defender fighting for its life. That is the action of someone who has done this before, and who does not feel the need to kill unless truly necessary. The bridge grew quiet again, as the weight of his words settled over the officers present. Somewhere far behind Tarn, an older officer named Grail Thess, who had served through many campaigns, spoke up cautiously. Marshal, if I may. There were old records, many years ago, about the humans. Reports from traders and explorers who ventured near their space and returned with strange stories. Most of it was dismissed as myth. Stories about ships that seemed weak until they were not. Stories about a species that valued peace so highly, they built terrible things simply to protect it, and never used them unless truly forced. Tarn turned to look at him. Why was this not part of the official briefing? Grail hesitated. Because it was considered unreliable, Marshal. Rumor, not fact. The Dominion does not act on rumor. Tarn's jaw tightened. He looked back at the screen, at the small gray shape of the watchtower, still sitting exactly where it had been before the attack, unmoved and unshaken. Perhaps we should have. Aboard the watchtower, Mara let out a slow breath as the last of the fleeing alien ships disappeared back into the main formation. She had not enjoyed what had just happened, but she had expected it, and she was relieved that it had gone as calmly as it had. Status report, she said. All 6 enemy vessels were engaged, Corvus said. 2 disabled completely, 3 damaged and forced to retreat. 1 severely damaged, but still capable of limited flight. No fatalities detected among the crews, based on standard biological signal readings. Mara nodded slowly. That had been intentional. The Sentinel program had strict rules about the use of force, rules written long ago by people who understood, better than anyone, what it truly cost to fight a war. The goal was never to destroy an enemy completely, if it could be avoided. The goal was to make the cost of continuing clear enough that the enemy chose, on their own, to stop. They'll come back with more, Mara said quietly. Highly likely, Corvus agreed. Their pride has been challenged. Species with strong military traditions often respond to early setbacks with increased aggression, rather than retreat, at least initially. Mara looked out at the dark stars, thinking of the long history that had led to this moment. The war, fought generations ago, the terrible losses humanity had suffered, before finally understanding how to protect itself without becoming the very thing it had fought against. She thought of the old records she had studied during her training, stories of entire fleets lost, cities destroyed, and the long, painful years of rebuilding that had followed. Send a message home, she said. Standard contact report. Let them know what's happening out here. Message prepared, Corvus said a moment later. Shall I transmit? Do it. The message traveled through the dark, carried along old but reliable communication relays that stretched quietly across human space, connecting distant sentinel posts, like the Watchtower, to the heart of humanity's defense network. It would take time to reach its destination, but when it did, it would set in motion a series of events, far beyond anything happening in this one quiet corner of space. Back aboard the Urkesh's Glory, Tarn stood in silence for a long moment, considering his next move. He was not a man who enjoyed uncertainty, but he was also not a man who ignored evidence simply because it did not fit what he had expected. The single Sentinel ship had proven far more capable than anyone in the fleet had imagined. That fact could not be ignored. Still, pride and duty pulled at him from different directions. Retreating now, after only a single skirmish, would be seen by many in the Dominion as weakness, perhaps even cowardice. His enemies within the Dominion's political circles would use it against him without hesitation, and yet, continuing forward without fully understanding what they were dealing with could lead to disaster far greater than the loss of 6 ships. Marshal, Vex said carefully, what are your orders? Tarn was quiet for a long moment before answering. Gather every piece of information we have on human military history. Old reports, rumors, anything at all. no matter how unreliable it once seemed. I want to understand exactly what we are facing before we commit the full fleet. Yes, Marshal, Vex said, moving quickly to carry out the order. And send a formal communication to the human vessel, Tarn added. Request a direct conversation, ship to ship, no weapons, no threats. I wish to understand who we are truly speaking with. Aboard the watchtower, Corvus received the new message and relayed it to Mara. Captain, the Corvus flagship is requesting direct communication. They wish to speak with you personally. Mara considered this for a moment. This too followed a familiar pattern from the old training records. After an early clash, many species chose to open direct communication, hoping to better understand the enemy they faced, or perhaps hoping to find a peaceful resolution before matters grew worse. It was, in many ways, a good sign. Open the channel, she said. Let's hear what they have to say. A moment later, the image of High Marshal Tarn-Ur-Kesh appeared on the watchtower's main screen, tall and imposing, his gray-blue features sharp and serious. He studied Mara carefully for a long moment before speaking, his translated voice calm but firm. You are the captain of this vessel? I am, Mara replied evenly. Captain Mara Ilian, Earth Sentinel Vessel Watchtower. I am High Marshal Tarn-Ur-Kesh of the Corveth Dominion, he said. Your ship has caused significant damage to my fleet, despite claiming to act only in defense. I wish to understand your intentions. Do you speak for your entire species, or only for yourself? Mara met his gaze steadily through the screen. She thought carefully about her answer, choosing her words the way she had been trained to, all those years ago. I speak only for this ship and for the boundary it protects, she said. But the warning I gave you was not mine alone. It belongs to every human, and to the long history that created it. We do not wish for war, Marshal. We never have. But we will not allow our home to be threatened without response. Tarn studied her expression for a long moment, searching for weakness, for fear, for the smallest sign of doubt. He found none. Then perhaps, he said slowly, it is time we understood each other properly, before more ships are lost on either side. Mara nodded slowly. I agree, Marshal. But understand this clearly. The warning still stands. Turn your fleet back, and there will be no need for further conflict. Continue forward, and I promise you, what you saw today was only the smallest beginning of what this ship and this border are capable of. The channel remained open, but for a long moment, neither of them spoke, each studying the other, two very different beings from two very different worlds, standing at the edge of a decision that would shape everything that came after. The conversation between Captain Mara Ilian and High Marshal Tarn-Ur-Kesh lasted almost an hour. Neither side gave away much. Tarn asked careful questions about human history, about the Sentinel program, about why a single ship guarded such an important border alone. Mara answered honestly, but carefully, giving enough truth to be respected without giving away details that might be used against her people later. When the channel finally closed, Tarn sat back in his chair on the bridge of the Ur-Kesh's glory, deep in thought. Vex approached him quietly, waiting for orders. Around them, the bridge crew worked in near silence, still shaken by the loss of the strike group earlier. What did you learn, Marshal? Vex asked. That she believes every word she says, Tarn said slowly, and that troubles me more than any weapon I have seen today. He stood and walked toward the wide viewport at the front of the bridge, looking out at the distant shape of the watchtower, small and steady against the stars. Somewhere back home, in the halls of the Dominion's ruling council, powerful figures were waiting for news of an easy victory, a quick conquest, another world added to the growing empire. Turning back now, especially after losing ships in the first exchange, would be seen as failure. And failure, in the Dominion, was rarely forgiven quietly. Marshal, Vex said carefully, the Council expects results. If we return without progress, or worse, if word spreads that we retreated from a single vessel. I am aware of what the Council expects, Tarn said sharply, cutting him off. He took a slow breath, calming himself. But I have led fleets for 30 years, by understanding my enemy, before committing everything I have. That vessel is not what it appears to be. Neither, I suspect, are the humans. He turned back to face his officers. We will not retreat yet, but we will not charge forward blindly either. Prepare a larger force, 50 ships, enough to overwhelm any single vessel's defenses through sheer numbers, but small enough that if we are wrong again, the Dominion does not lose everything in a single mistake. And if 50 ships fail as well? Graelthes asked quietly from the back of the bridge. Tarn's expression darkened slightly. Then we will know, without question, exactly what kind of enemy we have found ourselves facing. The order was given, and 50 warships began to separate from the main Corvette fleet, forming into a tight, organized formation. These were not simple fast attack ships like the first group. These were heavier vessels, carrying stronger shields, larger weapons, and full combat crews trained for sustained battle. It was, by Corvette standards, a serious and respectable force, more than enough to defeat almost any single enemy vessel they had ever encountered in 300 years of expansion. Aboard the watchtower, Corvus tracked the new formation carefully, its calm voice carrying a note of quiet seriousness. "Captain, the Corvette fleet has organized a significantly larger strike force, 50 vessels, heavier class than the initial group. This appears to be a serious escalation." Mara studied the readings on her screen. 50 ships was no small number. She had trained extensively for scenarios like this, but training and reality still felt very different when the moment actually arrived. She thought back to the long history lessons she had studied as a young cadet, lessons about the terrible war that had shaped everything the Sentinel program stood for. Nearly 100 years before Mara was born, humanity had faced a threat unlike anything in its recorded history, a hostile alien force, known as the Varun Ascendancy, a species that had believed conquest was not just a right, but a duty, a natural law of the universe, that stronger beings should rule over weaker ones. The war that followed had lasted almost 15 years. Entire cities on Earth had been destroyed. Colonies established on the Moon and Mars had been reduced to ruins. Millions of lives had been lost before humanity finally found a way to turn the tide and drive the Varun Ascendancy back, at a cost so terrible that it had reshaped the entire way humanity thought about war, defense, and survival. Out of the ashes of that terrible conflict, the Sentinel program had been born. Its founders had made a solemn promise: humanity would never again be caught unprepared, never again forced to fight a desperate reactive war on its own soil. Instead, they would build quiet guardians, placed carefully along every border of human space, armed with technology far beyond what any casual observer might expect, capable of responding decisively to any threat before it could ever reach Earth itself. But the founders had also made another promise, one just as important as the first. These guardians would never be used for conquest. They would never attack first. They would only ever act to protect, and even then, only after every possible warning had been given. Humanity had learned, through terrible suffering, exactly how dangerous unchecked aggression could be, and they had chosen, deliberately and carefully, never to become the very thing that had once nearly destroyed them. Mara had studied all of this during her years of training, but sitting here now, watching 50 alien warships form up in the dark, she understood it in a way that no classroom lesson could ever fully teach. "Corvus," she said quietly, "run a full readiness check. Everything. I want to know exactly what we're working with before this begins." "Running full diagnostics," Corvus replied. A moment later, it continued. "All primary systems fully operational. Shield generators at 100% capacity. Weapon systems fully charged and ready. Structural integrity nominal. I should note, Captain, that the watchtower was designed specifically to handle engagements of this scale and larger. You need not fear the numbers alone." Mara allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I know, Corvus. It's not the numbers I'm worried about." "Then what troubles you, Captain?" Mara was quiet for a moment, watching the enemy formation grow closer on her screen. "The people on those ships," she said finally. "They don't know what they're walking into. They think this is just another conquest, another world to add to their empire. They don't understand what happens when you push too far against something you don't fully understand." Corvus considered this for a moment before responding. "Marshal Tarn seems to understand more than his crew, based on the tone of your earlier conversation. Perhaps there is still a chance for this to end, without further loss of life." "Perhaps," Mara said softly. "But I doubt his council back home will listen, even if he does." The 50 Corvette warships moved into final position, forming a wide circle around the watchtower, cutting off any possible escape route. though escape had never been part of Mara's plan. Aboard the Urkesh's Glory, Tarn watched the formation complete itself, his expression grim but focused. "Open a channel to the human vessel," he ordered. A moment later, Mara's face appeared on his screen once more, calm and steady, despite the 50 warships surrounding her small vessel. "Captain Ilian," Tarn said, "you have seen the size of this force. I ask you now, formally, one final time, stand down, allow us safe passage, and no further harm will come to you or your ship." Mara studied him for a long moment before answering. "Marshal, I told you before, and I'll tell you again now, this isn't about the size of your fleet. It never was. This ship isn't trying to defeat you through strength alone. It's trying to give you every possible chance to walk away before something happens that neither of us can take back." "And if I refuse to walk away?" Tarn asked quietly. Mara's expression did not change, but her voice carried a quiet, heavy sadness. "Then I hope, for the sake of everyone on those 50 ships, that you understand what you're truly choosing." Tarn stared at her through the screen for a long moment, and for just a fraction of a second, something like doubt flickered across his sharp features. Then it was gone, replaced once more by the hard resolve of a commander who had led fleets to victory for 30 years and had never once turned back from a fight he had already committed to. "I have my orders, Captain," he said finally, "and my duty to my people. I am sorry it has come to this." "So am I," Mara said quietly. The channel closed. Aboard the watchtower, Mara took a slow breath, closing her eyes for a brief moment, before opening them again, calm and focused. "Corvus," she said, "begin full defense sequence. Minimize casualties wherever possible, but do not hold back if they commit to a full attack." "Understood, Captain," Corvus replied. Full defense sequence engaged. Deep within the watchtower's hull, systems far more advanced than anything the Corvus fleet had yet witnessed began to activate fully. Hidden weapon arrays extended slowly from concealed compartments along the ship's exterior. Shield generators hummed to life, drawing power from a core reactor far more advanced than its old, worn exterior suggested. And quietly, almost invisibly, dozens of small automated defense drones detached from hidden bays and spread out silently around the ship, positioning themselves carefully, waiting. Aboard the Urkesh's Glory, Tarn gave the final order. "All ships, engage. Target the human vessel directly. Full assault." The 50 Corvette warships surged forward as one, weapons blazing, streaking toward the small gray shape of the watchtower, at the center of their formation. For a brief moment, the old human ship looked hopelessly outnumbered, a single small vessel surrounded by 50 much larger warships, weapons fire lighting up the dark space around it like a violent storm. Then the watchtower began to fight back. Shields flared bright, absorbing the first wave of incoming fire with barely a shudder. The hidden weapon arrays opened fire in perfect, calculated bursts, each shot striking with terrifying precision, disabling engines, weapons, and shield generators across the attacking fleet. The small defense drones darted between the larger enemy ships, striking vulnerable systems that the main ship's weapons could not easily reach, moving with a speed and coordination that seemed almost impossible for machines so small. Within the first 2 minutes of battle, 5 Corvette ships had already lost power completely, drifting helplessly in the dark. Within 5 minutes, 12 more had suffered critical damage, forced to retreat from the fight entirely. The remaining ships continued to press forward, driven by orders and pride, but the tide of the battle was already turning in a direction none of them had expected. Aboard the Urkesh's Glory, Tarn watched the battle unfold with a growing, cold realization settling over him. This was not luck. This was not a desperate last stand by an outmatched enemy. This was a carefully controlled, precisely executed defense, carried out by a single ship against 50, and it was working. "Marshal," Vex said urgently, his voice tight with alarm. "We're losing ships faster than we can compensate. Should we retreat?" Tarn's jaw tightened as he watched another ship lose power on the screen before him. Pride pulled at him from one direction, duty pulled from another, and somewhere beneath both of those feelings, a growing sense of dread began to take hold. The dread of a commander who was beginning to understand, far too late, exactly what kind of enemy his empire had chosen to provoke. The battle raged on, and with every passing minute, the truth became harder for the Corvette fleet to deny. What had begun as a confident assault by 50 warships against a single old vessel had turned into something closer to a slow, controlled slaughter. Though slaughter was not quite the right word, since the watchtower still seemed careful, even now, about how much damage it truly caused. Aboard the HFY Glory, alarms blared across the bridge as more reports came in. 17 ships disabled, 9 more retreating with heavy damage. Not a single corvette vessel had managed to break through the watchtower's shields in any meaningful way. High Marshal Tarn Urkesh stood rigid at the center of the bridge, watching the battle unfold on the main screen, his face pale beneath his gray-blue skin. "Marshal," Vex said again, his voice edged with panic now, "we need to make a decision. If this continues, we will lose the entire strike force." Tarn said nothing for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the image of the watchtower, still steady at the center of the battle, still moving with calm, calculated precision, even as it faced down dozens of enemy ships at once. He thought back to his conversation with Captain Ilian, to the quiet sadness in her voice, when she had warned him one final time. He had dismissed it as simple diplomacy, a soft attempt to avoid conflict. He understood now that it had been something else entirely, a genuine warning, given honestly, from someone who already knew exactly how this would end. "All ships," Tarn said finally, his voice heavy but firm. "Cease fire. Retreat to safe distance." Immediately, the order spread quickly through what remained of the strike force. One by one, the surviving corvette ships broke off their attacks, turning away from the watchtower and retreating back toward the main fleet, their weapons falling silent. Aboard the watchtower, Corvus reported the change immediately. "Captain, enemy forces are disengaging. All remaining ships are retreating." Mara let out a long breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands, which had remained steady throughout the entire battle, trembled slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. "Casualties?" she asked quietly. "Minimal loss of life detected among enemy crews," Corvus replied. "Most damage was concentrated on engines, weapons, and shield systems, as instructed. Total confirmed fatalities among corvette forces, 14. All other affected crew members remain alive aboard their disabled vessels." Mara closed her eyes briefly, grateful for that small mercy, even as she understood how much worse things could have become if she had not been so careful. "Send a message to their flagship," she said. "Offer to allow their disabled ships to be recovered safely, as long as no further hostile action is taken." "Message sent," Corvus confirmed a moment later. Aboard the HFY Glory, the offer arrived, and Tarn read it in silence, his expression unreadable. Around him, the bridge remained tense and quiet, officers watching him carefully, waiting to see how their commander would respond after such a devastating and humbling defeat. "Accept the offer," Tarn said finally. "Begin recovery operations for all disabled vessels. No further hostile action without my direct order." The order was carried out quickly, and for the next several hours, an uneasy calm settled over the battlefield as corvette recovery ships moved carefully among the disabled warships, pulling survivors and salvageable vessels back toward the main fleet. The watchtower made no move to interfere, remaining exactly where it had been throughout the entire battle, quiet and watchful. Later that day, Tarn requested another direct communication with Captain Ilian. When the channel opened, his proud, confident bearing from their first conversation had changed considerably. He looked tired, and though his posture remained straight and formal, something in his eyes had shifted. Respect, perhaps, mixed with something closer to genuine unease. "Captain Ilian," he said quietly, "I underestimated you. And your ship." Mara nodded slowly, her expression neither triumphant nor unkind. "Most people do, Marshal, at least the first time." "How is this possible?" Tarn asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity now, rather than simple military calculation. "A single ship, holding off 50 warships, without losing so much as a single system. What kind of technology allows for this?" Mara considered how much to share. She thought of the Sentinel program's careful rules about information, rules designed to protect humanity, without provoking unnecessary fear or aggression from others. But she also thought of the honesty in Tarn's voice, and the genuine cost his people had already paid for underestimating her warning. "It's not just the technology, Marshal," she said finally. "Though yes, this ship carries defenses far beyond what its appearance suggests. It's what built that technology in the first place." A long time ago, my people faced a war we were not prepared for. We lost more than I think your history has ever recorded losing in a single conflict. Cities destroyed. Millions of lives lost. It nearly broke us completely. Tarn listened in silence, his expression growing more serious with every word. After that war, Mara continued, we made a choice. We would never again be caught unprepared. We built ships like this one, placed quietly along every border of our space, capable of responding to any threat before it could ever reach our homeworlds. But we also made another choice, just as important as the first. We would never use this strength to conquer, or to threaten, or to expand beyond what we already had. We built these ships only to protect, and only as a last resort, after every possible warning had been given. And if someone chooses to ignore that warning, Tarn asked quietly. Mara's expression grew solemn. Then they learn, the way you and your fleet learned today, exactly how far we're willing to go to protect what's ours, and exactly how careful we try to be, even then, not to cause more harm than necessary. Tarn was silent for a long moment, considering her words carefully. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. 30 years I have led fleets for the Dominion. I have conquered worlds far stronger, by simple measure, than this single vessel of yours. And yet, I have never faced an enemy quite like this. Not because of your strength alone, Captain, but because of your restraint. And that is something I did not expect to find here. Mara offered a small, tired smile. It's not restraint for its own sake, Marshal. It's because we understand, better than most, exactly how much destruction is possible when restraint disappears entirely. We choose not to become the thing that once nearly destroyed us. Far behind Tarn, on the bridge of the Urkesh's glory, Vex listened quietly to the exchange, his earlier confidence and eagerness replaced now by a quiet, sobering respect. He had joined the Dominion's military, believing strength alone decided the fate of every conflict. Watching this battle unfold, and hearing Captain Ilian's words now, he began to understand, for the first time in his young career, that there might be more to true strength than simple numbers and weapons. Grail Thess, the older officer who had first mentioned the old rumors about humanity, stepped forward quietly and spoke, his voice thoughtful. Marshal, if I may, perhaps the wisest choice now is not further conflict, but genuine communication. If this single ship represents even a fraction of what the humans are truly capable of, continuing forward would only bring further loss, without any real chance of achieving the Dominion's original goals. Tarn nodded slowly, clearly already leaning toward the same conclusion. He turned back to the screen, where Mara still waited patiently. Captain Ilian, he said, I believe it is time my superiors understood exactly what we have found here, rather than simply reporting an easy victory that never came. I request permission to withdraw my fleet peacefully, and to open proper diplomatic communication between our peoples, through appropriate channels. Mara felt a wave of quiet relief wash over her, though she kept her expression calm and steady. This was, in many ways, the outcome she had hoped for from the very beginning. Not conquest, not further bloodshed, but understanding, reached the hard way, as it so often had to be. Permission granted, Marshal, she said. And for what it's worth, I hope this is the last time either of our peoples needs a lesson like this one, to find a path toward peace. Tarn inclined his head slightly, a gesture Mara did not fully understand but recognized, from the tone of the moment, as something close to respect. As do I, Captain. The channel closed, and over the following hours, the remaining Corvith fleet began its slow, careful withdrawal, disabled ships carried carefully among the healthy ones, retreating back across the boundary line they had crossed, with such confidence only a day before. Aboard the watchtower, Mara finally allowed herself to relax fully, sinking back into her worn chair, exhaustion settling over her now that the immediate danger had passed. Corvus's calm blue light pulsed gently on the screen beside her. Well done, Captain, Corvus said quietly. Mara let out a tired laugh, rubbing her eyes. I don't know if well done is quite the right way to describe 14 dead and dozens of ships crippled, Corvus. Perhaps not, Corvus agreed thoughtfully. But compared to the alternative, Captain, I believe it qualifies as a genuine success. A full-scale war, fought across an entire border, would have cost far more than 14 lives, on both sides. Mara nodded slowly, knowing Corvus was right. even if the knowledge did little to ease the heavy feeling in her chest. She thought of the 14 Corvette crew members who had not survived the battle, families somewhere among the stars who would soon receive news of their loss. War, even a small, contained conflict like this one, always carried a cost that no amount of careful restraint could fully erase. "Send the full report home," she said quietly. "Everything. The warning, the battle, the withdrawal, all of it. Command needs to know exactly what happened out here, and what it might mean going forward." "Report prepared and ready to transmit," Corvus said a moment later. "Send it," Mara said. The message went out once more across the dark, quiet space of the silent line, carrying with it the story of a single ship, standing alone at the edge of human territory, and the alien fleet that had learned, in the hardest way possible, exactly why that lonely vessel's warning should never have been ignored. Weeks passed after the battle at the edge of the silent line, and the story of what had happened there slowly spread, first through official channels, then through quiet conversations between officers, traders, and diplomats who had heard fragments of the tale and could not quite believe them at first. Back on Earth, in a large, quiet command center hidden deep beneath the surface of a mountain range, the full report from the watchtower had finally arrived and been reviewed by the highest levels of the Sentinel program's leadership. Admiral Renata Cole, an older woman with silver hair and a calm, steady presence, sat at the head of a long table, reading the final lines of Mara's report for the third time. 14 casualties, she said quietly, to the room full of senior officers and advisors gathered around her. A full invasion fleet, turned back with minimal loss of life on either side, and a request for open diplomatic contact from their commanding officer. I'd call that a success, by any measure this program has ever hoped for. One of the younger analysts in the room, a man named Julian Reyes, looked up from his notes. "Admiral, should we consider reinforcing the Sentinel posts along that border, given the scale of the fleet involved? 400 ships is no small number." Admiral Cole considered this for a moment, before shaking her head slowly. "The whole point of this program, Julian, has always been restraint paired with strength. If we flood that border with additional ships now, it sends the wrong message entirely, that we expect war, that we're preparing for conquest of our own." Captain Ilian and the Watchtower proved, quite clearly, that a single well-prepared vessel is enough to handle even a fleet of that size, without turning the situation into something larger and more dangerous than it needs to be. She looked around the room at the gathered officers. "We'll continue monitoring the situation closely, of course, but for now, I think the right move is exactly what Captain Ilian has already requested: open, careful diplomatic contact with the Corvette Dominion, through proper channels, built on the understanding we've just earned." Far across the galaxy, aboard the great capital world of the Corvette Dominion, High Marshal Tarn Kesh stood before the Dominion's ruling council, delivering his own report in person. The council chamber was vast and imposing, filled with powerful figures who had expected, before his arrival, to hear news of an easy victory and a new world added to their growing empire. Instead, Tarn told them the truth, exactly as it had happened. He described the single Sentinel vessel, its calm and repeated warnings, the devastating efficiency of its defense, and the careful restraint it had shown even in victory. He spoke of Captain Ilian's words, of humanity's terrible war generations ago, and of the quiet, patient strength that war had ultimately created. The council chamber remained silent for a long moment after he finished speaking. Many of the older council members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly troubled by what they had just heard. Finally, an elderly counselor named Aura Vel spoke, her voice carrying the weight of long experience. "You are telling us, Marshal, that a single vessel, alone at the edge of their space, was capable of turning back an entire invasion fleet, and chose, even in victory, not to destroy it completely?" "Yes, Counselor," Tarn confirmed. "And I believe, based on everything I witnessed and everything Captain Ilian shared with me, that this single vessel was only a small example of a much larger, carefully hidden defensive network, one built specifically to avoid exactly the kind of conflict we nearly started." Another counselor, younger and clearly still skeptical, leaned forward. "And you believe we should simply abandon any interest in human territory, based on the word of a single defeated commander?" Tarn met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down despite the challenge in the younger counselor's tone. "I believe, Counselor, that continuing forward would cost the Dominion far more than it could ever hope to gain. I have led fleets to victory for 30 years. I know the difference between an enemy that can be defeated through strength and one that has already shown restraint it did not need to show. The humans are the second kind. I would rather learn to work alongside such a people than risk losing everything by underestimating them a second time. The council remained divided for a long while, debating the matter carefully, weighing pride against practicality, ambition against the clear evidence Tarn had presented. In the end, though not without resistance from some of the more aggressive voices within their ranks, the council agreed to formally open diplomatic relations with humanity, sending careful, respectful communications through the channels Captain Ilian had offered weeks before. Back aboard the watchtower, life slowly returned to its familiar quiet rhythm. Mara resumed her long, patient watch over the silent line, though now, occasional messages passed between her ship and Corveth diplomatic vessels, carefully building the beginnings of a relationship that neither side had expected to form, only a few weeks earlier. One quiet evening, as she sat in her worn chair, watching the stars drift slowly past, Corvus spoke softly beside her. "Captain, I have received an update from Earth Command. Formal diplomatic talks between humanity and the Corveth Dominion are proceeding well. Marshal Tarn Urkesh has been appointed as their primary liaison for continued communication." Mara smiled faintly, genuinely pleased by the news. "That's good to hear, Corvus. I didn't expect things to turn out quite this way, honestly." "Was there another outcome you expected, Captain?" Corvus asked. Mara thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "I think part of me expected them to keep pushing, no matter what we did. That's usually how these things go, at least according to the old records. I'm glad Tarn was smart enough and honest enough to see past his own pride." "Indeed," Corvus agreed, "though I suspect your own restraint played a significant role in that outcome as well, Captain. A less careful commander might have destroyed the entire strike force outright, leaving little room for the kind of understanding that followed." Mara nodded slowly, thinking back to the difficult decisions she had made during the battle, the careful balance between necessary defense and unnecessary cruelty. It had not been easy, and she knew, deep down, that a different choice in those critical moments could have led to a very different outcome entirely, one far more costly for everyone involved. "That's the whole point of this program, though, isn't it?" she said quietly. "Not just strength for its own sake, but strength used carefully, only when it's truly needed, and never more than that." "A wise philosophy," Corvus said. "One I believe your predecessors understood very well, given the terrible cost that first taught it to them." Mara looked out at the quiet stars once more, thinking of the long history that had led to this moment. The terrible war fought generations before her birth, the careful, patient program built from its ashes, and the single lonely ship that had, against all odds, managed to turn an entire invasion fleet into the beginning of a lasting peace. Word of the Silent Line incident continued to spread slowly across known space in the months that followed, carried by traders, diplomats, and curious travelers who found themselves both fascinated and cautious upon hearing the full story. Other species, some who had once considered testing human borders themselves, quietly reconsidered their plans after learning what had happened to the confident Corveth fleet. Humanity's reputation, once uncertain and poorly understood among the wider galactic community, began to shift slowly into something new. Not a reputation built on aggression or conquest, but one built on quiet, careful strength, and the clear understanding that peace, for humanity, was always the first and preferred choice, though never the only one they were prepared to offer. Months later, a small diplomatic delegation from the Corveth Dominion arrived at the edge of human space, requesting formal permission to establish an official embassy on one of humanity's outer colonies. Marshal Tarn Urkesh, no longer leading invasion fleets but now serving as an official ambassador between the two peoples, personally oversaw the delegation's arrival. As his shuttle approached the quiet outer colony, escorted respectfully by a small group of human ships, Tarn found himself thinking back to that first tense encounter at the Silent Line, to the calm, steady voice of Captain Ilian warning him to turn back, and to the hard lesson that had followed when he had chosen, at first, not to listen. He understood now, in a way he could not have fully appreciated before, exactly what that lonely sentinel ship had truly represented. Not simple military strength, but the deep, careful wisdom of a people who had once nearly lost everything, and who had chosen, deliberately and permanently, never to let that terrible lesson be forgotten. Far away, at the edge of the silent line, the watchtower remained exactly where it had always been, quiet and steady among the stars, watching patiently over the border it had sworn to protect. Captain Mara Ilian continued her long, solitary duty, knowing that somewhere out among the vast darkness of space, other unknown fleets might one day approach this same quiet boundary, unaware of the careful, patient strength waiting to greet them. And if they came with peaceful intentions, they would find a fair and honest welcome. But if they came seeking conquest, they too would receive the same simple, honest warning that had once turned back an entire invading fleet, a warning given not out of weakness, but out of a hard-earned wisdom, carried quietly across the stars by a single, lonely Earth ship, standing watch at the edge of everything humanity had ever sworn to protect.